brother of the Rosh Chodesh, what's the title of Rosh Chodesh Yagel Torah for Young and Nashon Montreal. Please give him your attention. I think he's also close to Chavrusa of the halacha.
Okay. All right. So, without too much introduction, it's an honor to be here, Take. And the Rosh Chodesh's younger brother, so you could already. It's not going to be as of Choshev Shiur. Anyway, so I want to go through the sugya that we're going to speak about today is Eidechot Nemon B'Yisurin, which is something that I'm sure you came across or you will come across in halacha. I'm not going to get too into the halacha shebedavar. I mean, Eidechot Nemon B'Yisurin is a sugya which is it's one of those sugyas that go on and on. But I want to go a little bit through the sugya of the sugya of in Gittin. There's a sugya in Gittin about Eidechot Nemon B'Yisurin, and has quite a few very strong yisoides in the whole sugya. And so that's what I want to go through, understanding a little bit the Gemara, the Shittas Rashi and Tosafot here, and how it applies to Poel Mamash. So the Gemara starts, if none of you have the Gemara in front of you, but we could at least go through it a little bit. The Gemara says, everyone knows the Mishnah, right? Someone who brings a get in Dinas Hayam, he has to say for nichtam for nechtam, right? And one of the reasons why, which Rabbi says, is because the fish ain't bekin nishma, right? Because they're not baki in chutz la'aretz nishma. And therefore, you have to say for nichtam for nechtam when you bring the get to Eretz Yisrael. And the question is, l'chayra, if it's such a inyan of ne'emanus, right, that a person has to say before nichtam for nechtam, to show that it's a get, which a kosher get, which is nichtam lishma and nechtam lishma. So then you need to aid him for it, right? That's what the Gemara asks. You need to aid him. Why is it that it's enough to have one person, a shliach, to come and say for nichtam or nechtam? The over here, it's a din ne'emanus. So the Gemara answers, Eidechot Nemon B'Yisurin, right? That regarding Yisurin, this is an union of Yisurin here. I mean, it's not momentous. Eidechot is ne'eman. So Rashi says right away, what does it mean, Eidechot Nemon B'Yisurin? So he says clearly, Rashi says very clear that Hemino Torah, right? The Torah gave trust to one aid in Yisurin. Where do we see it? It says Kol Echad V'Echad Misrael. For example, we see Nafroshes Truma, Shchita, right? Nikra Gid V'Achelev. Again, you don't have to have aidim that testify that these things were done properly, right? A sheikh says that he was, he shechted properly, or nikor agida and the chalev, or someone who gave truma. It's enough that a person just says that he did it. It's good enough, right? Eidechot Nemon B'Yisurin. And the Torah gives, like it says in the Pasuk, Shuchat, Rashi doesn't bring it here. But it's clear that you could trust one aid for these inyanim. We're going to see soon Tosafot has also another place where it's learned from, but in Rashi it's very clear that that we see clearly in many places in Torah that the Torah gave ne'emanus, gave trust to an Eidechot. So the Gemara says, no, over here it's different. Why is it over here it's different? Because it's a chaticha. For example, when you have a suffix, whether something is chaylev or shuman. So in that case, for example, where it's not as chazik isura, meaning that we don't know for sure that it's Isur, then we say Eid Echad Nemon B'Isurin, which means that when do we say that Eid Echad is Nemon? When is there an Nemonus for an Eid Echad? When there's no Chazok of Isur. Right? For example, we have a suffix, whether it's Chelev or Kosher Shuman, and once an 8 says it's Kosher Shuman. Right? In that case, we say that he's trusted. But in our case, Hochod is Chazak Isura, the Eishesish. Over here, it says Chazak Isura that she's an Eishesish. Why? Because she's married, right? She's married, and now we want to divorce her. So it says Chazak Isura that she's not allowed to anyone else, and here you want to matir her to the Oilam. So then, Eid Echad is not going to be Nemon. That's what the Gemara learns. So Rashi right away says, Lechoira, what are we going to do with the Shchita and Nikuragid and these few things that we mentioned before that Eid Echad is Nemon? Lechoira over there, it's also Chazak Yisura, right? Because the animal was not shechted. Any animal is not kosher to be eaten until it's shechted, right? So over there, it's also Chazak Yisura. Or Truma, for example, you can't eat from your grain until you give Truma. So it's Chazak Yisura that Truma wasn't given, right? So over there we trust, and that's where the Torah allows, the Torah trusts the person. So he says, Rashi explains that he brings a nun nekuda in Eid Echad Nemon B'Isurin, which is beyod lesakno, which means that because by Truma and Shchita, for example, you could, on your own, be mesak in the situation, right? You could shecht it, you could give the truma and make it good. That's why the Torah trusted an Eid Echad in that situation, even though this is Chazak Yisura. Mashenkein, when the shliach brings the get, so it's a Chazak Yisura, and it's not beyod of the shliach to megarisher, because it's only in the hands of the Baal, the husband, to be megarish his wife. So therefore, when it's Chazak Yisura, she's an Eishes Ish, and it's not beyond of the Shliach to Megarisher, Eid Echad is not Nemon, and therefore we're back to the question, the Choyda, why we don't need two people to come and say, before Nichta for Nacht. Now there's something interesting here. That, the Tosafos asked a question on Rashi, and others ask as well. The Chayda, Rashi is confusing here because Rashi says, what kind of rayas? Yeah, what kind of proofs does he bring to say that Eid Echad Nemon B'Isurin? He brings Shchita and Truma, right? Which we learn later on that are Chazak Yisura. And then Rashi has to faranfer that it's beyode. The Choyra, why is he bringing this rayas from Chatchila when, at the beginning? What kind of rayas are those to begin with when they're not compared to our situation? Right? Our situation is an Isha, which is Chazak Yisura, and it's not beyode. So why is he bringing these as these rayas over here? And then later on he says, no Hamol, that they're different. So what's going on over here? So the Arhu explaining Rashi, the Arhu explaining Rashi, that it goes hand in hand. That when it's not beyodoi, when it is beyodoi, right? When it is beyodoi, then it's automatically lo yis Chazak Yisura. Which means we're saying over here like this. The Gemara is saying like this. It says l'chayra Eid Echad Nemon B'Isurin. And when is Eid Echad Nemon B'Isurin? So we're thinking in any situation. And then later on we say even specifically when it's lo yis Chazak Yisura. But Rashi over here again plays with by Ushchita, brings it lechatchila in the question when we speak about lo yis Chazak Yisura, and then brings it in the answer when we speak about this Chazak Yisura. How is it going to work? So there are who answer that the way it works, the real nekuda here is, according to Rashi, is if it's beyode or not beyode. Which means that when it's beyode for someone to mesaken something, right? When it's in your hands to make something kosher, then hemino toiro, then the toiro trusts you as an eidechod to testify, and it's not in any more chazik isura because it's in your hands to take care of it. And we'll see soon other situations which are like that in halacha. But when it's not beyode, so then it's a chazik isura, and that's really what the Gemara is explaining. That's the way that Rashi understands here the sugya. And that's why what the Gemara is saying over here, that our case is different because it's chazik yisura. The pshat is not because it's chazik yisura. The pshat is because it's lav beyodoi. Because lav beyodoi, so therefore, meaning unless there's a suffix, but because there's no suffix, it's chazik yisura, and there's no neemanus for the aid to testify. So that's how it looks like the gang of Rashi over here. And then the Gemara finishes off. And have dova shebe'ervo. We'll see soon there's another girsa also as well over here. Vehave, meaning, because it looks like that it's an additional nekuda. Have dova shebe'ervo. It is a dova shebe'ervo. When dova shebe'ervo pachas mishnayim, right? Dova shebe'ervo, you always need to aid him. And we learn that from the pasuk. So again, the question here, again, it doesn't make sense. Meaning, we always know that dova shebe'ervo pachas mishnayim. Right? We know that you always need to aid him, and it's not from the pasuk. So what's the halacha of the Gemara here? Right? We're asking at the beginning of the Gemara that eid echad should be nemon, like all the eidias should be Torah. Then we say a difference between chazik yisura, la chazik yisura, meaning beyode and not beyode. And then we're saying like what's going on? From the beginning, the question should have been that we need to aid him to say v'nita v'nachtam because it's davar shebe'ervo. When davar shebe'ervo pachas mishnayim. So why does the Gemara say has a meaning to say dechanem bisurin to begin with when ein davar shebe'ervo pachas mishnayim? So there are who explain in Rashi. I mean, again, Tosafot has a different direction here, which we'll get to Tosafot in a second. But in Rashi, at least, it seems that you can't say dova shebe'ervo, right, unless there's a ischazik isura, which means now when do we say ein dova shebe'ervo pachas mishnayim? When we're sure that this is a situation of an isur, of his chazik isura, of lav beyode, and in that situation, then only in that situation we could say that ein davar shebe'ervo pachas mishnayim. But to a certain extent, at the beginning of the Gemara has a thought, I have a minute to say that over here, I mean, before we say about the inyan of this chazik isura, at least there is some kind of lav is chazik isura in this case of the get, and therefore there's not going to be a need for two eidim to say for nichta for nechta. Only once we say that it's chazik isura and it's lav beyode, we come up with that svare, then we say, oh, now it's a davar shebe'ervo, which means it's only a davar shebe'ervo when it's chazik isura, when it's lav beyode. But before the Gemara understood that, the Gemara thought that maybe it's not considered a davar shebe'ervo in this case. Meaning, before the Gemara came up with this idea, because the Gemara sees eid echad nemon b'isurin and ein davar shebe'ervo pachas mishnayim. So, in a sense, the Gemara thinks that perhaps there's a way to make a difference. Meaning, when there's no, you could have a situation of eid echad nemon b'isurin, even in davar shebe'ervo, because the same Torah says eid echad nemon b'isurin. and Dover Shebeh Pachim Mishnayim. But once the Gemara understands that there's a difference between Beyodin and Beyodoi, is Chazik Yisura, Lo is Chazik Yisura, then we say, once it's Chazik Yisura, that's considered the Dover Shebeh Ervo, and it's not part of the Geder of Eidecha Neum B'Yisuri. So that's how it looks like from Rashi, the direction of the Gemara. Yeah, clear? Huh? The Fierach, okay. That's what it looks like over here, the Hemshech HaGemara. Now, Tosafot wants to, dig in more into the sugya and understand more in detail what's going on over here. So according to Tosafot, it comes out like this. There's a few important nekudas in Tosafot. So number one, Tosafot understands in the beginning of the Gemara that Ein Dover Shebeh Pachas Mishnayim, right? And nevertheless, the Gemara is still asking the L'chorei Eidecha Neum B'Yisuri. So right away, Tosafot wants to find reasons why even when Ein Dover Shebeh Pachas Mishnayim, we would still say that Eidecha Neum B'Yisuri. So for example, he brings a few situations, right? For example, Tosafot says, meaning Svar is why it will be, it's going to still, even in the Dover Shebeh Ervo, you're still going to trust on it. So for example, in one of the Tosafot here, it says, Eidecha Neum B'Yisurin lehatir. Tosafot says that perhaps the svara why to say Eidecha Neum B'Yisurin is because, at least in this case, in the question of the Gemara, is because here you want to be matir here. It's not lesser. Okay? It's not, for example, let's say Eide Kiddushin, right? So Eide Kiddushin, it's a gather of lesser, right? Because you want to be aser to the whole world. But here, Eide Gerushin is to be matir her to the world. So l'chayra, when it says Eidecha Neum B'Yisurin, even though Ein Dover Shebeh Pachas Mishnayim, it's to tell you that it's lahatir. So again, we're going to see here, and there's a few things like that in Tosafot we're going to see, that there is, even in a situation of Ein Dover Shebeh Pachas Mishnayim, you could still find reasons, svaris, that could tell you why to be matir with Eidecha. Because again, the Torah is the one who says Eidecha Neum B'Yisuri. Right? So here, for example, and one of the things is lehatir. And that's a havmin of the Gemara. At the end of the Gemara, the answer is that it's not lehatir really. At the end of the day, it's once the Gemara comes into the inyan of Chazik Yisura or not Chazik Yisura, so then automatically there's, even if it's lehatir, but there's a strong svara to say that an Eidecha is not nema. And only after, according to Tosafot, it seems that like there's another girs in the Gemara that Dover Shebeh Ervo is only how he's sofo, right? Vehave Dover Shebeh Ervo. Meaning in the Gemara, according to Rashi, the girsa is regular, which means that Dover Shebeh Ervo is a hemshech to his chazik yisura, right? Haval hocha this chazik yisura deishasish have a Dover Shebeh Ervo, which means that because there's chazik yisura, then it's considered the Dover Shebeh Ervo, like we said before. But according to Tosafot, which the Gemara is already building on this union of Ein Dover Shebeh Pachas Mishnayim, and still wants to find reasons to be matir, the vehave Dover Shebeh is only ha'isafah, which means once we said that it is chazik yisura, and we need to aid him, then the Tosafot says, even if you would think that in this Chazik Yisura, you still will believe 1/8, right? Like he brings from other Gemaras, then I'll tell you that it's a Dover Shebe'erv, and then Dover Shebe'erv Pachad Mishnayim. Which means that it's only like a snif, it's a Tosafot to the actual answer to the question that it's Chazik Yisur over here. I mean, the actual answer to the question, why over here, an Eid Echad wouldn't be believed. So again, back to the beginning of the Gemara, when it says, L'choyra Eid Echad Ne'em Bisurim, the question over here is, L'choyra, we could, even if it's Dover Shebe'erva, we could still find reasons why to be matir. So take, for example, this brings us a raya. For example, he says, where do we know from the Eid Echad Ne'em Bisurim? Right? So he brings a raya from Nida. Right? He doesn't bring the rayas that Rashi brings from Shchita and Trum and other places. He brings dafka from Nida. I mean, some say, by the way, that Rashi, when he says Eid Echad Ne'em Bisurim, it's more of a svara dikeinyan, which means that if the Torah wouldn't trust one person, then you can't fulfill the Torah, right? Because you're going to go enod over safe, right? So some will learn in Rashi that it's a svara dikeinyan. Mashen, according to Tosafot, it comes out that it's a raya, it's afka raya, and the Torah itself says it clearly. Some say that it's for Shuchat. I think they bring from other Gemaras that the Torah says that person goes shecht, which means that itself is a raya that you're trusted. Eh? But the Tosafot, for example, brings a case of a nida, which is a surin, and she's trusted, right? Like we say, v'safra law, she's trusted to count her own cheshbon of nida, and she goes to the mikveh whenever she needs to, and we trust her, and it's ma'asim b'chol yoyim, right? We don't need special edim that follow the seder of the woman and know when she's tehoira, when she's temeya. So here also, even though to a certain extent we could consider it a dover shebe'erva, right? Nevertheless, we still trust her. Why? And Tosafot says, why? Because number one, it's lo yischazik yisura. Why is it lo yischazik yisura? Because she becomes tahir after her shiva nekim, without even going to the mikveh. She's already considered tahir, and it's beyoda to go to mikveh, which means the additional going to the mikveh, which allows her to be with her husband. That's an addition. That's a beyoda. So we see in Rashi, the way Rashi understands is that the beyodoi is what makes the chazok, right? That if it's beyodoi, then that's lo yischazik. But when it's lav beyodoi, that's what makes the chazok. Mashan according to Tosafot, it comes out that it's two different things. There's yischazik and there's beyodoi, right? It's two different inyonim, and that's if, for example, Tosafot doesn't like the way that Rashi brings the proofs of shchita when we in the question when we said Eid Echad Ne'em Bisurim. He doesn't like that he brings the proofs from Shchita and Nikur Agid. Right? Like the Tosafot says over here, he says, Lo hoyo lo lehaskir afrosh strumo Shchita. Why? The behanu nemo nafagav this chazik yisura mishum de beyode lasaknam, which means that he learns that his chazik yisura and beyode are two different inyanim. And therefore, when you have an ischazik yisura, but nevertheless it's beyode, for example by truma and shchita, so then it's not part. It has its own gather. It's not part of the gather of Eid Echad Ne'em Bisurim. It looks like from Rashi, from Tosafot, that when the question arises in the Gemara, the Eid Echad Ne'em Bisurim has nothing to do with shchit and truma, because really shchit and truma is beyode, and beyode, the pshat of beyode is that it's not the gather of Eid Echad Ne'em Bisurim to a certain extent. Why? Because it's in your hands to do it. So then there's no need for a special ne'emonus of Eidecha Ne'em Bisurin. Mashiach, according to Rashi, it comes out that it is part of the Eidecha Ne'em Bisurin. Adrabah, that is the mokir of Eidecha Ne'em Bisurin. This union of Shchita and Truma, etc. So according to Tosafot, that you have that is Chazik and Beyod, there are two different inyan. And really the question of the Gemara over here is L'choyra Eidecha Ne'em Bisurin, because we think to a certain extent maybe it's not as Chazik Isura, or we're trying to be matir, meaning it's not a regular case of Isurin, that Dova Sheba sorry, it's not a regular case of Dova Sheba, and therefore Eidecha would be Ne'emon. So that would be the question of the Gemara. And once the Gemara introduces that there's a difference between Ischazik Yisura and Lo Ischazik Yisura, and over here it's a case of Ischazik Yisura, then we could say, now we need two Eidim. And not only that, even if you would think that Ischazik Yisura, you would still permit one Eid. Nevertheless, we'll say that Dova Sheba Erva. So Dova Sheba Erva together with his Chazik Yisura will make it impossible to trust 1/8. That's what would come out from Tosafot. Now there's something interesting here that in Likutei Sichos, so the Rebbe has a Sicha there in Mishpatim in the early I think Chalak Gimel. So the Rebbe over there brings, it's a whole Sicha about if in Nido, right, the Isur on Bailo, is that part of the Tuma? Or, he brings a Chkira from Rabbi Yosef Engel, I think. If it's, the Isur on Bailo is part of the Tuma, or it's a separate Inyan. I mean, there is a Tumas Nido, and then there is Isur al Bailo, right? A Chkira like that. So the Rebbe says that from this Inyan, the Eidecha Ne'em Bisurin, is learned according to Tosafot from Nida, right? That we trust the Sofra law. So that's a raya that Isha Asura Lebailo is not an Inyan of Tuma, because Ein Lemeidin Isurin Mituma, Isur Mituma. That's a rule. You don't learn in Tuma has its own rules, and Isurin have their own rules. You can't learn one from another. So it's very clear that this union of Isur Ishal Bailo is not an union of Tuma. It's definitely an union in Isur. Right? The Rebbe also explains it according to Chassidus. But the point, it's very interesting, the way it fits over here according to Tosafot, right? That we're saying in Tosafot itself, right, it has to come up with two answers why by a Nido we say the Eidecha Ne'em Bisurin. Right? Number one is because Lo Yischazik Yisura, because she becomes Tohir on her own. Right? So that might be dealing with the Tuma, Shebedover. Could be, I'm saying, Ula Yeshleima. Right? And then they go into the mikveh, which we say it's Beyodo. That has to do with Isur Ishal Bailo, right? To allow her to be with her husband. Which means it's not. So it's interesting. Could be when you say you learn the Eidecha Ne'em Bisurin from Nido, is specifically from this inyan of Matir min Vesofra law, which means that she's trusted for her to be Toher, or for her to be allowed to her husband. In that sense, which is Beyodo. So then we learn from it that Eidecha Ne'em Bisurin. Now we see Take in the Loshen of the Rashba. I didn't have a Rashba, so I had to take a picture from the Rashba in the Yagdal Torah here. So, where is it here? Oh, so here the Loshen Rashba is very strong. similar to Rashi. So Take Rashba Take brings that the Hemina Teira lechol echad ve'echad, and then it says, "Ukedeksiv v'shochat es ben abokar." Right. So Hitake brings the pasuk of Shochat ben abokar, which means that we trust the person who shechts. But then he says like this. So he says like this, Atakem, Abaya Behemo, it is Chazak Isura, because Bechayeho, a Behemo is Becheskas Isura Emed, that's why you can't eat it. But Ikalamema, the Hosam Shine the Biyodal Sakna, right? And he says like this, V'hocha hochi kaman. Haval hocho hois chazik isuro. Why? She'ein biyodel esaknu. You see the lashon over here. This is very strong, like Rashi's lashon. Haval hocho hois chazik isuro regarding a reishish by the get. Why? She'ein biyodel esaknu. Because she's not able to mesaken. Haval shchito biyodel esaknu. The Rav mitzion ze shchito muchzokin hein. But filo misheina mumche umuchzok, so biyodel esakna de shluchai. Right? The shliach could do it, no problem. That's also a lady's trusted regarding shchita, because she could learn, like Tosafot says, either she could learn the halachas, or she could have someone do it for her. But we see very clearly, by the way, the Shitas Rashi here, that biyodoi is what makes the chazaka. Is what make the lav biyodoi is what makes the cheskasisu. But biyodoi doesn't make the cheskasisu. Meaning when it's biyodoi, then it's not it's goireya the chazaka. Mashen connotations we see very clear that this doesn't like that. So that's one very strong nakuda here in the Rashba. Also, we see something else that in Tosafot also we see this nakuda. The word of Gilui Milso. Noch a word in Tosafot is very interesting. The lechoira, meaning we said again the question that we had before. Lechoira ein davar shebeva pachas mishnayim, right? So then why is the eidech aneon bisurim? Meaning the question at least. So Tosafot brings that in our case we know that there's already eidim which are chasumim on the star. So we have already eidech simen, right? So we have a proper get. We just want to know a Gilui Milso, right? Because we're worried about them bekin lishma. So it's only the Rashi of Tosafot is that it's only a Gilui Milso. So in a Gilui Milso, eidech aneon bisurim. So we see again that Tosafot is trying to find ways why we should be matir an eidechod, even by a get, which is dover shebe'erva, which is ein pachas mishnayim. Even in that case, we're trying to find a reason why to say the eidechod nema. So one of them was because of matir, for example. One of them is, which is later on in Tosafot, which he brings that's only mitzvah Gilui Milso, which we're trying to find out, if it's lishma, not lishma, even though it's very serious lishma, not lishma, but at least it's already signed with Eidim. We want to just megale das that, or megale the milso, that it's a kosher get. So in that sense, it will be strong enough to say Eidech bisurim even in that situation. But Mashenk and Rashi, we don't see Rashi taking that direction. Rather, it seems that according to Rashi, the Dover Shebe'erva only came later on once we established the union of Chazaka. Right, once we say the union of Chazak Yisura, then Taka we could bring the union of Endav Shever Pachas Mishnayim. Now we see also very similar by, we learn it everyone learns it. Soita, we're going to be learning it soon. So we see also a very similar inyan regarding Eided Tumo, right? Eided Tumo, for example, we say that regarding, the Gemara says over there, regarding Eided Tumo, which means once there was kinui, once there was stira, right? And now there was Eided Tumo, so we trust even 1/8, right? So the whole limud in the Gemara over there. But one of the nekudas in the Gemara over there is that it's raglaim ladova, right? Once there was eidim for kinui. Once there was eidis for stira, then it's raglaim ladova that if there's 1/8 for tumo, even if it's a dover shebe'ervo, he's still neman, right? Because meaning after kinui and stira, and now there's a 8 for tumo, it's enough. Which means again, meaning if we look at the gang of Toisus to a certain extent, the word of, you could find many ways to say the Eidech Hanam Bisun even in a Dover Shebe'er. Because, when you have any Pesach to say such a thing, then you could say it. Unless, and by the way, and even in Soita it is a matzav of his Chazak Yisura. Meaning we know that she's an Asia C, she's not Stam. Eided Tumah is not, but nevertheless, Raglaim Ladover is very strong in that sense. I mean, the Gemara also brings over there the union of Dover Shebe'ervo, Pachim Mishnayim, but the Gemara goes through the whole sugi there. But it's very interesting that once you find an ekude that will allow you to say Eidech Hanam Bisurin, even a Dover Shebe'ervo, it's a possibility. Now also there's another dugma, for example, you have now coming to Pesach. Coming to Pesach, you have also the yin of Bdikas Chometz, for example. Also it's a similar nekuda, that by you're allowed to make a shliach, right, to be boidik the Chometz for you, and to trust him that he took care of your Chometz. Now over there it's spoken about that it's a yin the Rabbanon, Bdikas Chometz the Rabbanon, because of Bitul, but the nekuda, the Alter Rebbe also brings in the Shulchan Aruch, that because it's, even though the house is Chazak Yisura, that's a Lashon Alter Rebbe, because it's Chometz Babayis a whole year. So how can you trust someone? I mean, even trust yourself. How can you trust yourself by B'dikas Chometz? Right? The Alter Rebbe brings regarding trusting Noshim and Ktanim. That's what he goes into, that it's a Yun D'Rabbanan, and therefore you can even trust them. But Bichlal, the union of trusting by B'dikas Chometz, they got rid of the Chometz. What's in Nekuda? It's because of B'yodeh, it's the same Nekuda. Because it's B'yodeh to get rid of the Chometz. But because of B'yodeh to get rid of the Chometz, Mimela, like Rashi's direction, there's no Chazak Yisura here. Right? Mimela, because B'yodeh, there's no anymore, you don't have any more a strong reason to say they still have Chometz at home. Anyway, so the point is just to, the Shiur was just to get a little bit of an idea, Yesoid of, the way the Gemara takes the approach of Eidech Hanam Bisurin, and then after that, once you go into all the details, into all the different halachas in many different areas in Shulchan Aruch, you'll see very much that this is going to be the Yesoid which all the halachas will follow. Right? It will be this Dover Shebe'ervo, if it's a regular union of Yisurin, if it's a union of Mominus, if it's a union of Ischazak Yisura, Lo Ischazak Yisura, Beyodeh, Na Beyodeh. So that's really the Yisoid of this whole union. And also, like we say, if you have reasons to, like a Gilui Milse, or Raglayim Ladover, or Lahatir v'lo lesser, for example. So in all those situations, you can find, you'll see in halacha, you'll find ways to be matir anei dechod. Now you'll find the Shulchan Aruch, the halacha will find ways to be matir anei dechod, even though min ha'toira al pishnayim eidim yakum dover. Anyway, so atzlocha rabbeinu al inyonim. Kosher and Felach and Pesach. Ashkoyach for the opportunity. It's just, huh?